Hello, good evening, and welcome to the event Digital Field Trip with Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg and Josef Settele, a collaboration between Science Notes Magazine and State Studio as part of Berlin Science Week. Welcome from Hypertopia, welcome from State Studio, an art science gallery and exhibition laboratory that has been opened in 2018 as a space for artists and scientists and curious others to explore the creative friction between art and science and rethink the questions that shape our tomorrow. In challenging and desperate times like this, when it seems that nothing less is at stake than renegotiating the very relationship that we have with our planet, we are desperately looking for new questions, new answers, new ways of thinking, and new modes of operating. Such new impulses are often found at the intersection where two seemingly disconnected fields intercollide. Such an intersection where interesting things emerge is certainly the intersection between the fields of the arts and the sciences. Over the last couple of years, a lot of really stunning and exciting projects of collaboration between artists and scientists have emerged. And this very field is also, and this intersection is also the topic of tonight's event. We want to investigate and explore together how the arts and the sciences can come together to create meaningful new impulses for a sustainable future. Hypertopia as an exhibition has been opened on October 23rd, just 1 week before the lockdown. And it shows exciting works of artists working at the intersection of science and arts that anticipate a post-crisis future to explore approaches for a meaningful present. Currently, unfortunately, we're closed due to the COVID regulations. So we're even more happy and excited to be able to present to you tonight this digital event as part of Berlin Science Week. This event is part of the discourse program of Hypertopia. The general idea of the discourse program is to take the exhibition and its artistic works as a starting point for further discussions and, together with partners, explore the extended context and the questions behind the different perspectives. The starting point for today's event is the work Designing for the Sixth Extinction by Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, which you're seeing just in the back of me right now, which is a really amazingly inspiring work which invites us to dive deeper into the past and possible futures of synthetic biology and biodiversity. We're very, very excited about a very special guest of this evening, Professor Dr. Josef Settele, one of the world's leading experts on the topic of biodiversity. As I said, the event is a collaboration between Science Notes and State Studio, and we started to collaborate with Science Notes as State Studio since our opening in 2018. We wanted to go forward to produce an event together since the very beginning, and tonight is finally the first time that we're going to do that. So I'm really happy about this. I'm really excited to be presenting this event together with Science Notes tonight to you. And I'm super excited also to have with us tonight the publishing director of Science Notes, Thomas Susanka, which I would love to hand over right now.
Yeah, hi Chris, and hi everybody. It's great to be here virtually in the State Studio finally. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this very much as well. In fact, today very much, because I don't have to refresh my browser and worry about the election in the US, which of course will has also implications for the topic of tonight. But yeah, I'm looking forward to not thinking about that for 2 hours, and I'm looking forward to what we do tonight, right? We will let art and science collide and hopefully create some ideas and visions for a sustainable future and the possible futures of biodiversity. So here at Science Notes Magazine, what we try to do at the Science Notes project we explore new ways of science journalism, right? And bring science on stage, and or in this case, virtually on Zoom. And we love using powerful science stories with illustration, with photography, with music, and with art. And so it's great that we finally meet here together. And in our last issue, in fact, we dove into the oceans and explored the science of the oceans and its implications for world biodiversity. And our next stop will take us into the wilderness. And in fact, that journey starts tonight, right? We hope to include some pieces of Hypertopia exhibition in that issue, but tonight is in fact the first starting point of our exploration of the wilderness. And it's just great to have like two fantastically fitting people here, a highly remarkable, stunningly visionary artist, and together with, as you already said, Chris, with one of the world's most prolific researchers in the field of biodiversity. So I'm really super excited, looking forward to it. And I don't want to talk too much because it's not about me, it's about the two people that follow. So everybody have fun.
Thanks, Thomas. So yeah, what's awaiting us tonight? The schedule of the evening is as such. We will start with a guided tour through the exhibition of Hypertopia, which then is followed by a 50-minute live talk and introduction by Professor Dr. Josef Settele into the topic of biodiversity from a scientific and political perspective. And then we will hear a 30-minute lecture from the artist Dr. Alexandra Ginsberg, laying out her view on the relationship between biodiversity, synthetic biology, and the Anthropocene. After that, the first part of the evening closes and we go forward into the second part, the much more interactive part, where you are invited to join us on a little Zoom live interaction where we will explore as a playful thought experiment in small groups the possible future of synthetic biodiversity and synthetic biology together. So let's get started. Let's get started with a tour of the exhibition Hypertopia by my very dear colleague Johanna Wallenborn, one of the artistic directors of the exhibition Hypertopia and co-founder of State Studio.
Welcome to State Studio. We are an art science gallery based in Berlin-Schöneberg, and my name is Johanna Wallenborn, and I'm happy to present our latest exhibition Hypertopia to you today. So I'm going to be your guide, and I'm going to take you on a quick tour now, so come on in.
For historians, the present had lost itself over time. There were no shadows, echoes of no surface.
Now that we are here, where are we? Still on the same planet, for sure, but forces are shifting. How did we get here?
Nobody left to be beautiful.
What stance should we take? What actions? And where are we heading?
The ghost of what was to come, same issue.
Hypertopia is a journey between past, present, and future. It is a place that follows the question of how the persistent moment of a perceived state of emergency can transform the relationship between man, nature, and technology in a way that opens up niches of hope. The exhibition is inspired by a vision of collective change in consciousness and wants to explore a post-crisis future to help pinpoint meaningful actions in the present. With a selection of artistic positions, propositions, and different exploratory projects that incorporate scientific methods and speculative ideas, Hypertopia challenges hierarchies, probes ideas, and imagines scenarios for a new planetary optimism. Hypertopia combines the notion of collective consciousness with that of the conscious collective to bring awareness to the interdependence of actions, actors, disciplines, and different times.
What had survived was ancient. She found fossils of ferns stamped in stones from way back when. Her own landscape had done some opposite like that. She felt like a fjord. She'd take kidneys over the North Star and water over watches. She'd take time. She'd take misdirection, indecision, intuition. She'd take suspension over disbelief. She'd take the third person over you.
In the exhibition space, symbiotic coexistence confronts instrumentalized ecosystems in a biosynthetic future. Data activism meets fictional narratives from non-humans, and humans are dissected and reassembled in search of the origin of our being.
The screech of crystals forming, futures foreseen, the tangle of tubular seaweed, the rings of starfish with no hearts and feathered hunger. The opacity leaked out of her blood and her bones. Spectral. All the heat had distance.
The exhibition includes works by Himali Singh Swan, Annie Liu, Dominic Koch, Jana Maria Doman, Oriana Persico, and Salvatore Iaconesi, The Curious Minds, and Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg.
I would like to introduce the work of Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, Designing for the Sixth Extinction. In her work, the artist investigates the potential impact of synthetic biology on biodiversity and conservation. While conservationists struggle to reverse the effects of the Anthropocene and protect endangered species, bioengineers and synthetic biologists are working on engineering new organisms. In Designing for the Sixth Extinction, Ginsberg opens up this possible future where companion species are designed to support endangered species and organisms, while taking an ambiguous look at what would the wild look like in a biosynthetic future, and can we actually preserve by looking forward?
In this version of the future, Ginsberg proposes different types of companion species, including a slug that leaves a trail of alkali to neutralize acidic soil, This mobile bioremediation unit is designed to neutralize high soil acid levels caused by pollution. The chassis is designed to disturb the topsoil as it moves. Outlets on its lower surface disperse an alkali hygroscopic, so a fluid that absorbs moisture from the air. It can replicate up to 10 times, but it has a kill switch. Or a pathogenic pump to treat the infection that causes sudden oak death. At full inflation, the membrane pump pushes serum into the infection site. Post-injection, the pump deflates, decouples, and spores are released. The device operates using a 6-base DNA code that produces synthetic materials to prevent ingestion by natural organisms. These fictional design species are ecological machines that fill the void left by vanished organisms or offer novel protection against more harmful invasive species, diseases, and pollution. It makes us wonder, could we tolerate rewilding, using synthetic biology to make nature better? And if nature is totally industrialized for the benefit of society, which for some is the logical endpoint of synthetic biology, will nature still exist for us to save?
Thank you very much, Johanna, for the tour. I hope you got a little insight into the exhibition and can take this as a starting point and inspiration for the further program of tonight. With that being said, I would love to hand over to Thomas for the next part of tonight's program.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Josef Settele. Professor Josef Settele is here, and I'm happy to see him again. He was already a speaker at Science Notes at the club event a couple of years ago. And, well, there are so many things about him that I could say right now, but I just want to give you like two things. First is, what's he doing in the first place? And, well, he was heading the report of the Intergovernmental Platform on the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And that is something that most people don't even ever have heard of, right? Everybody knows the IPCC and the IPBES, that is the same thing for biodiversity. So it's a really fascinatingly crazy work that they are doing, because what they do is they connect the dots of all the biodiversity researchers around the globe. And so Josef told me about what he's doing, and this is just an impressive work. They connect so many studies, and they help actually to build this broad picture that we have of biodiversity. So all that we know about the state of the world today in terms of biodiversity, that's thanks to the IPBES and thanks to the work of Professor Settele. So this is really remarkable, and so it's really exciting in the context of the topic of tonight to have him speak about that. And the other thing is that I still have in mind that he's a true biologist, and his focus of research is butterflies. And so when he was at our first event, he showed us some pictures of him as a young man with a net running through the meadows and collecting butterflies. And he's one of these types of scientists that can really make you engage with the science, and they open your eyes for the wonders of nature and its manifold interconnections and dependencies and intricacies. And by telling these stunning stories, like very local stunning stories of butterflies and wasps and and ants, in fact, how they interconnect and how they depend on each other, that's what made me remind like why it is so important to look at biodiversity and to develop ideas for a future where we can protect biodiversity and yeah, develop ideas for sustainability. So it's I'm looking forward to your talk, Professor Settele. It's great to have you here again, and yeah, Zoom is yours.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Pleasure to be here. So I will try to make my best. It's not so much about the nitty-gritty details today, the ones you mentioned, but it's kind of the big picture I try to draw. And it's based on the work we have done in the recent 4 years with a large team of people. So I try to get my presentation started. Let's see how it works. Still the American election, sorry. So can you see it now? Okay. It's the wrong one. It's the one with the, you just see one slide or you see many slides? Okay. Okay, so here's my name once again. And just by the way, if somebody wants to have some more information, you can contact me by the email, and I tend to answer most of the emails in a reasonable time frame. Let's put it like this. I'm doing this presentation on behalf of many of my colleagues, but especially of my host institution, which is UFZ in Germany, and IPBES, the Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research. And I talk about this IPBES, or Global Assessment on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, about the main findings we had in this report. This is the summary for policymakers, which we have approved in a process like in the IPCC, where all the partner governments, which are around 140 governments now, agree sentence by sentence on a common text, which kind of summarizes the work we've done over the years, which in total is 1,600 pages, the original text, but this one is only 40 pages. And I will just try to extract some of the main points. But first of all, it's teamwork. So that's the core team working on this one. And I had the pleasure jointly with a colleague from Brazil, who is an anthropologist, Eduardo Brondisio, another colleague from Argentina, Sandra Diaz, working on social systems and also on plant ecology. So together with the two of them, so the three of us had the honor, pleasure, duty, task, whatever you might call it, to, let's say, coordinate this bunch of people. It's like a big ant mound, something like this. It's 150 core authors, an additional 350 other authors involved. It's 500 people who worked on this report, and many others out there who've made comments and provided material. So some of the main findings we had have been summarized in quite some PR events last year. And the main thing is that the biosphere and the atmosphere upon which humanity as a whole depends have been deeply reconfigured by people. So 3/4 of the land area is very significantly altered. 2/3 of the ocean area is experiencing increasing cumulative impacts. And we have lost more than 85% of wetlands ever since man took over the kind of, let's say, rule of this planet. What relates to today's topic, this kind of, let's say, the signs of a sixth extinction crisis, we are not yet there. So let's say sixth extinction is still not happening, but we are on the way to it. It's about extinction. Here you can see some statistics on certain groups of amphibians and mammals and birds. Where you can see in the last 50 to 100 years, we had a dramatic increase in the cumulative number of species or percentage of species which got extinct. So amphibians, at the moment, we lost 2.5%, which doesn't sound a lot, but it's at least 150 species out of 6,000. But it's just a starting point of things which are ongoing now. You can see on the bottom, there is the baseline, the natural extinction, which also takes place, this grayish bar. It's quite different from what we experience. So in summary, the global extinction rate is at least tens to hundreds of times higher than it has ever been on average over the last 10 million years. And that's a big human impact here. We also looked at other things, what we call nature's contributions to people, or some call it services, different categories of ecosystem functioning, which we use for our human well-being. And let's say number 2, for example, well known as the pollination part, but many others, regulation of air quality or freshwater quality, etc., going as far down as the, let's say, cultural aspect like learning, inspiration, or supporting identities and maintenance of options is number 18. And all of them show in the last 50 years, or the majority of them shows a deep decline in their, let's say, way how they can support us. So in summary, taking these 18 elements, these 18 services, the potential of nature to contribute continuously and sustainably to a good quality of life for humans has decreased in nearly all investigated contributions. These are 14 out of 18. So that's a kind of ecosystem component which is important here, which is heavily based, of course, on biodiversity. So you can summarize that we have dramatically reconfigured the fabric of life of the planet. And we also pointed out there in much more detail, of course, the world is becoming much more interconnected, yet increasingly unequal. So we have more connectedness, but also much more inequality across the globe, but also on local scales. We also tried to look at how we can meet the global societal goals through urgent and concerted efforts, and we have to address direct drivers of change, which have accelerated during the last 50 years to levels unprecedented in human history. And these direct drivers are across the different biomes, across terrestrial, freshwater, marine life, are mainly land use and sea use change. So the last 50 years until now, direct exploitation, which in the marine part is fisheries, for example. Climate change already posing a threat, already number 3 up to now, and it will surely increase and overtake some of the others in the future. It's pollution, it's also invasive species, number 5, which have been mentioned also before in the exhibition as one example of a very important aspect. But what's more important, of course, meeting these societal goals we need, let's say, concerted efforts to addressing also the root causes, the indirect drivers of nature deterioration. And these are the ones which relate to social values, about our life, about the way we act, about demography, about culture, about economic and technological components, institutions, governance, and also conflicts. All these things are let's say, the basic, the background course of all the things we experience, which needs a big effort for the whole society across very different parts of society, including arts, including science, including agriculture, whatever it is, they all have to be included here. So the main points are the change of governance, the economic systems, equity, a very important component. It's also about cross-sectoral planning. It's about incentives. And last but not least, it's about social narratives and values. So what are we aiming for? Are we going for the best GDP, gross domestic product, or are we going for human well-being? And I think we need a shift here in our attitude towards how we deal with our planet. We also made some scenario work, and we said that plausible scenarios, which include transformative change, I come to this in a moment, are compatible with the 2030 sustainability objectives, that's the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and 2050 vision for biodiversity. Important components are changes in production and consumption of energy and food. It's a low to moderate population growth, and it's nature-friendly and socially fair climate adaptation and mitigation, because there are also conflicts there. We have to deal with land, with our resource, which is limited, and we have to produce food. We want to conserve biodiversity. We want to, let's say, compensate for climate failures we had, etc. So the options for our future, that's the transformative change part, requires a fundamental system-wide reorganization of technological, economic, and social factors, including paradigms, targets, and values. I had this before already. Our narratives are very important here. So in a nutshell, if you summarize the entire report, we can say we did the most comprehensive global picture of the links between nature and people in the recent times ever produced. The trends we explored are varying and clearly unsustainable. And it's a call for action. We need prompt action, go further and faster. We have to tackle the root causes I mentioned of nature's deterioration. And we need coordination and integration across sectors and scales. So having said this, I would like to go a bit into the detail of the process, because some people might know about the report, but only few people know what's behind it. So what was the background? What was the effort we did? So the summary, which I mentioned at the beginning for policymakers, the 40-page document, as I said, was done in a concerted effort across the governments and across science, sentence by sentence, which was agreed as a consensus document. Then you're sitting here in a big room, you have the text in front of you, and you go line by line, and each government can make a comment, and finally you hopefully agree on the text of the one sentence, and you continue. That's a matter of lots of patience and lots of diplomacy, and also physical, let's say, good condition is also required. In your work, that's my working place here, the food supply is a bit limited, an apple and some water. You're trying to get comments from your colleague by the email and on the laptop, and also watch what's out there in the hall. Are people asking you what are the questions you have to answer? And if there are things you can't agree, then there are so-called breaks. So the lunch break, for example, doesn't mean you go for lunch. You just stay there and discuss with your colleagues from different governments to agree on certain topics and come back with a solution for the text, which has not been agreed beforehand. So you have to agree on this one. It's a very long process. It's a whole week of working from morning until late at night. You go out there to discuss graphs. So I had this graph, which I have just shown a while ago, that was a negotiation just on the graphs. One day, we took one day only for 11 figures to get them right. We redone the whole figures overnight and discussed them again, the adopted version or the adjusted version the next day for another whole day. If you're lucky, then finally you end up in the plenary, that's the one here, and you agree on this figure as a consensus document. Then you go to the press. There was a media launch that was also on the May 6th, 2019, with Bob Watson, who was the chair of IPBES, and some other colleagues, for example, from UNESCO. you present something. This was a picture taken by a colleague, by a friend of mine, a journalist actually from a newspaper in Germany, from the Zeit. When he has asked me a question, he sent me this picture, and actually how he looked at me while asking me from his office was like this. So just sitting there, relax and say, okay, let's ask him some nasty questions. We were sitting there in this kind of press hall with 80 journalists in the place and 700 online, and they just try to squeeze something out of you. In the end, it was worth the effort. So on the same day, there was an invitation with Macron here. That was in the Élysée Palace. It was 1 hour exchange about the state of biodiversity, about the things politicians can do. And he took up quite a lot of the information we have assembled in a joint activity between governments and science. There was a big kind of press in the next weeks, headlines all across the globe, mainly focusing on the extinction of species. So we said we have 1 million species which are prone to extinction if we don't counteract. It's important to have this counteraction as a component. So at the moment we are not yet there, but we're on the way to lose at least 1/8 of the species on the globe if we really don't react and counter in a different direction. You have different responses here also in social media. There was Pope Francis, there was Greta Thunberg, there was Hillary Clinton, you name it, Justin Trudeau or Al Gore. So everybody seems to be aware of this kind of phenomenon, this kind of problem. It also goes up to the economy. So the World Economic Forum this spring, this February actually in Davos highlighted the most important global risks actually, the likelihood and the impacts. And there are different groups of people judging on this one. The one is multi-stakeholders, the one is global shapers. But what they all came up with was that biodiversity loss is on the top 4 issues we have to deal with, also from an economic viewpoint. And it's very similar if you look at the other one, which is climate action failure. So climate and biodiversity surely are 2 of the most important components we have to deal with, also to serve our economy, to serve our well-being in the longer term. Having said this, I'm of course an optimist. I will just publish this book tomorrow, which is in German, but it's a kind of let's say, my personal view on things, which combines climate loss, climate change, species loss, and pandemics, which is also an important component, which has lots to do with biodiversity. With this, I want to thank you for your attention. I hope it's some good input for the things you're doing. And I guess this link between science and art is really one of the, let's say, important, interesting, challenging, and also, let's say, nice things we have to do also to solve the problems jointly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Josef. I think, Chris, I think we should just really let this sit here and maybe directly connect this to our topic, because just what Josef said at the end is that it's really important to bring the fields together and then create ideas. I think the urgency is pretty much clear. So let's just move on directly to Daisy Ginsberg. Chris, I hand it over to you.
Thomas, thanks. Let's do that, and yeah, let's also take this really as a starting point for further reflection. It was really fascinating to see also the social dynamics that's behind such political important decisions, and really what's at stake with biodiversity. And Professor Settele, you mentioned the importance of social norms and values, and renegotiating how we go about dealing with our relationship to nature. And that's exactly what Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg is working on. So I'm really excited to be able to introduce her as our next speaker. Dr. Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg is a world-renowned artist working at the intersection of art, design, technology, and sustainability. Her works are often created and conceptualized in exchange and collaboration with researchers, and oftentimes also with tech companies, where she examines our fraught relationship with nature and technology. She explores subjects as diverse as artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, conservation, and evolution. And she investigates, as one of her main themes, our human impulse to better the world. She reads architecture at the University of Cambridge and design at Harvard, received a Master's of Design Interactions at the Royal College of Arts in London, and has been exhibited all around the world. Her works are shown in places such as MoMA in New York, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tokyo, the Centre Pompidou, and the Royal Academy. She received the World Technology Award for Design in 2011 and the London Design Medal for Emerging Talent in 2012, and she's currently also one of the nominees for the Falling Walls Science and the Arts Prize. I'm really excited to have Daisy's talk tonight with us. The talk has been pre-recorded as Daisy is currently spending time in the English countryside with limited access to a stable internet connection. So what you will see here has been recorded this week. So with no further ado, I'd love to invite you to dive into the work of Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg.
It's great to be with you this evening. I'm sorry we're not all together in person. I'm actually up in the Lake District in the north of England at the moment, so you can see the posters behind me. And this evening I'm going to tell you a little bit about the piece Designing for the Sixth Extinction, which is in the exhibition Hypertopia at State Studios. I want to start by talking about solutionism. This is a term which has been adopted and defined by the technology critic Evgeny Morozov. And it's this idea that humans can solve difficult problems using technology. And he's written about it in the context, especially of Silicon Valley. And there's a sort of overriding belief in Silicon Valley that we can solve the problems that society creates just by creating new technologies. So, for example, Amazon packages being stolen from your front door can be solved by creating something like a Ring doorbell. So you can pretend to be at home and deter burglars, or at least film the thefts. And even the most enormous problems can be solved. We just need the right technologies. So the kind of greatest extent of this is the idea of geoengineering, that we can intervene on a global scale to mitigate the effects of climate breakdown. And this, is such a huge decision, and we cannot know the unintended consequences of such an act. And, the sort of questions of how we would even reach a global consensus on such a decision remain unanswered. So this idea that our faith in technological solutions is enough avoids the social or other complicated political mechanisms that we need to address problems. And underpinning this is the optimistic belief that problems can or could be solved, and that these problems should be solved, that life should be frictionless and trouble-free. We don't need to deal with or think about the environmental or social consequences or the demands that will get us to a complex solution. Solutionism is utopian, this idea that all humans want the same thing, that we all have the same dreams, and we will all be treated equally in the process of making the world better, according to those setting the visions. It doesn't take the complexity into consideration of human societies, let alone the complex ecosystems that we live amidst on this planet. And underlying this is the idea that design and technology can make things better. And we can leave to one side here design's entrapment in capitalist systems of production. We design stuff for landfill, and that's really been the emergence of design from the Industrial Revolution. The idea that we design, or the job of the designer sort of emerged to differentiate one set of products from another. And that's not really the core idea of design. Because designers solve problems, but I'm quite sort of fascinated by this fundamental desire to design, this utopian belief that we can make the world better. Herbert Simon, the political scientist, described design as a process to change existing conditions to preferred or better ones, which is what the sociologist Richard Howells calls a utopian impulse. But what about problems that are so big that designers or anyone can't solve them? What does it mean to solve a problem like human-induced climate breakdown and biodiversity collapse? Can it even be solved? a reusable bottle rather than a single-use bottle is a small step, but this is a bit like rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. The changes needed are at the scale of social systems, values, elections, which is pretty pertinent today, and international agreements, and challenging this fundamental incompatibility of a vision of sustainability and the reality of growth that our economy relies on. Gross domestic product, or GDP, is our universal measure of better in 2020. That's how we measure whether countries are getting better. So we all take a role in changing the course of the future that we're part of. But tonight I really want to talk more fundamentally about this idea of this better nature that we imagine. There's an imaginary that's being created of a sort of Edenic nature. And is that what we're talking about when we want to make nature better? We're talking about going back to this place, going backwards. And some might say that we just need to remove us from the picture. And I think there was interesting discussion last year around Paolo Antonelli's Broken Nature exhibition at the Milan Triennale, which described a sort of a path to a more elegant extinction for humanity. But that's not a hopeful position, which is why I think there was some backlash to that proposition, although it is a fascinating one. And I think it's not necessarily pessimistic to imagine that we can't make things better, but I think we're optimists. As a human, I get out of bed even if the world looks pretty dismal, and I think 2020 is a pretty dismal year. But the fact that we can imagine it otherwise, that it could somehow be better, is fundamental to being human. And Ernst Bloch explored this perhaps unique trait of human hopefulness in The Principles of Hope, his seminal work, which was written in some of the darkest years of the 20th century, during the 1930s and 1940s. Even if we think that things are bad, means that we think a better world is possible. Humans are hopeful animals. So it may not be possible to make the world better, but we should at least try. But what is a better world? And I wrote my PhD about this question of better. I became fascinated as I heard technologists, entrepreneurs, designers, and advertising campaigns, politicians talking about making things better. And I began to wonder, well, what was better? Whose better was being delivered? And who gets to decide? And I'd come to this sort of space through my exploration of a field of technoscience called synthetic biology, which is now is not so new, but at the time was a new approach to genetic engineering, which I first heard about in 2008. And I was fascinated because engineers were coming into biology and promising to make biology easier to engineer. And it seemed to me that they were promising to transform biology and life with it into a 21st century design discipline. And I wanted to know, what would they design? What would good design be? And who would get to decide? And since 2008, I've been sort of developing a practice to find ways to ask these questions, forcing me to reflect on my role in it as well, but really trying to understand this human desire to alter nature, to make it better. And the provocation I originally made of biologists as designers has become increasingly real. And from the beginning, I heard synthetic biologists promising a better future, and I wanted to know what was better to them. And I began to realize that within this community of engineers and scientists, better had very different meanings, with very different visions and values attached. So synthetic biology emerged around 1999 as its visionary engineers sought to make biology better, making it easier to engineer by their definition. The idea that you could engineer DNA like a form of code was sort of fundamental to this practice. You'd be able to design code and program biology to do useful things for humans. Bringing biology under human control meant that even undergraduates can use it to make useful things for people. This image here is a very early example of that. It's a plate of bacteria that have been engineered to go dark when exposed to light, like photographic film. And this is 16 years old, from 2004. Around 2005, I think a second meaning of better began to emerge, that this new, better biology could make the world better. Engineers and scientists started to engineer microbes to do things like produce fuel. And that was the dream, that we would be able to create biofuels and at the same time create a world of sustainable abundance where we could have what we want without changing our behaviors. We could link the economy to the environment and consume without changing anything. So sugar cane grown in Brazil could be used to power jets. And to sell this idea of better, these visionaries promised disruption, but without really disrupting anything. And big oil was investing in this, the oil companies. And this was a vision that the same players could create the same products, but without changing very much. So we have the same systems in place, and the same kinds of transport and the same people making the money, and nothing has really changed except that we're growing sugarcane and destroying forests. And what happened with that future was that bioengineering at the time couldn't compete with oil prices, and many of these companies pivoted to making much more expensive products by the litre. So a gallon of face cream is more valuable than a gallon of oil. But this green veneer that making things with biology is naturally better, I think still remains. And I also identified a third, more radical meaning of better, and that is bettering nature itself, reinventing nature, making nature better, solving its problems, whether they're human created or not. And design begins to look like this: a mosquito engineered so its progeny don't survive. This is made by a company called Oxitec and has been in trials and released into the environment for years now. And that is a beginning of a spectrum to engineering ourselves, to changing our own nature. And experiments on gene editing human embryos are well underway. And with this come all sorts of unintended societal consequences, potentially. And I became really interested in this third area in 2013 when I went to a conference that was held at Cambridge University where conservationists and synthetic biologists were meeting for the first time. They were discussing essentially if they have anything in common, or conversely, would they be a problem for each other? And I was struck by their wildly different ideas of what was better. Conservationists are in a way looking backwards, trying to protect biodiversity from humanity. Meanwhile, the synthetic biologists are busy inventing new biodiversity for the same benefit of humanity. And what I hadn't been aware of up to this point were efforts actually to try and combine these two fields. So a very interesting idea was being discussed at the meeting. Could synthetic biology be used to infect nature, to save it? For example, engineering coral so it could withstand warmer waters, or to engineer mosquitoes, as I mentioned before, or to try and combat avian malaria, a disease wiping out birds in Hawaii, for example. And I began to wonder, well, what would the wilds look like in this synthetic biological future if we were engineering organisms to preserve nature? And that's the idea behind the work Designing for the Sixth Extinction, which is in the exhibition at Hypertopia. I wanted to create a work that would be a method to explore these questions and identify issues. And I was working independently, but consulting expert synthetic biologists and conservationists along the way. And the sort of process of making the work and then presenting the work to scientists for me is a way to actually instigate discussion. So I wanted to explore how this dream of engineering nature that they were proposing would be managed, whose interests would be served, and what kinds of philosophical, ontological, and administrative issues might arise. So the main part of the work is this large photograph of a forest, and there's a series of smaller prints, models, and a timeline. And if you look closer at the large image, which in the exhibition is a large light box looking like a window out into a forest, you see this pristine, biodiverse forest. But as you look closer, you begin to see unusual organisms lurking in the undergrowth. In the fiction that I created, these companion species would be designed to preserve biodiversity and released into the wild. The organisms are described in the small images alongside and with accompanying text, and they're described only as machines. And I purposely chose to use the very instrumental language of patent applications. I was experimenting with what does it mean to take away the livingness of a life form and just turn it into a machine. So, for example, this self-inflating anti-pathogenic membrane pump is a kind of fungus that I've imagined that would be designed to fight a very real tree pathogen called sudden oak death, for which no cure yet exists. The fungus-like device would inflate when it detects disease and inject a pathogenic serum into the tree that would help to mitigate the disease. Now, this is a fictional organism, but within the patent, I reference very real ideas from synthetic biology, which I was collecting in my research. For example, this device would work on an expanded DNA system, so an expanded DNA code with extra bases, like a different operating system. And this would separate it from nature, in inverted commas. And that's actually a very real technology that's being created and it's being proposed as a way to make design biology safer for release, as in theory it would run differently. It wouldn't be able to interact in the same way. It's a bit like Mac versus Windows. This is the mobile bioremediation unit, a slug-like device that releases alkali slime to neutralize acidic soils caused by pollution. And with all of these organisms that I imagined, it contains a kill switch, which again is a very real idea that is being developed and researched as a way to limit the lifespan of engineered organisms. So it would have a way to terminate itself, it would die. So this is, again, sort of exploring this technical language of the patent application as a way to sort of remove our care from these organisms. Now, this work builds an alternative world to reveal problems and issues, and the timeline, I know it's very small on the screen, is a way that sort of reveals the research behind this project and explores the processes behind how something like this might happen, how current and past trends might emerge from past and present decisions, how this future might emerge. And at the sort of inflection point in the center is this moment where synthetic biologists and conservationists are having these crucial discussions about the future of nature. Now, I was curious though how things like designing biology to kill itself might be the outcome of an agreement where different groups have to come together to actually decide something, a bit like geoengineering. How do you decide when you really can't know all the consequences? So in the right-hand side of the diagram is my exploration of the system, the kinds of institutions that might be created to enable this process. So biodesigners being hired by corporations to engage in a form of biodiversity offsetting, which is actually a current ecological practice where one piece of land is available for development and another piece of land can be remediated to account for the loss of a pristine space. This work looks utopian in this sort of presentation that I've created. Nature is saved with these new kinds of devices that are roaming around freely. But what's crucial for me and the way I've developed my practice over the last sort of 10, 15 years is that I really enjoy troublemaking, and by that I mean sort of using the works as a provocation, not just to the public or general public like me, but also back into the field of science. So I present my work to the field to debate with those making decisions now. So these aren't speculative designs to explore preferable futures, but actually for me ways to change potentially the present. So when there were headlines like synthetic creatures could save the planet in Discovery News, I got an email from someone in the synthetic biology community who was worried that promising that nature would be saved would actually harm the future of synthetic biology, because the public might be disappointed when scientists failed to save nature. And I was sort of accused of being potentially ruining the future of the science in some way by another member of the field. But what's crucial is that I wasn't actually promising this, but I was reflecting on synthetic biology's own promises and using the work as a way to take that back to the field to prompt further reflection. And I was really happy when the editors of this scientific journal, Fungal Genetics and Biology, used one of the images on the cover, and they used this image and referenced it in the editorial as a way to prompt discussion to their readers, who are expert scientists, about what they should or shouldn't design. And I think that for me was a really kind of big moment in my practice. This was about 5 years ago, where I realized how these works can be used for discussion. If we go back to this sort of Edenic space, I think what's really important to think about here is that the organisms themselves didn't choose their features. In designing for the sixth extinction, we're choosing what gets to be made and what gets to live and what doesn't. You know, the ostrich didn't decide to grow a longer neck to get a better vantage point over the other animals. The way that biology and biological evolution works is an evolutionary relationship with context. But humans can imagine, plan, design, envision. And I think there's a very different set of forces as a result of that. And if we come back to this question of what is better for nature, we have to remember that nature, and we're part of that nature, doesn't really operate this way. So better is a human idea, and although we're part of nature, maybe this idea of anticipation, of hopefulness, is something unique to us. But I think it's also crucial to remember that it has human values. So and human measures. Better in nature really only means survival across species, not individuals. So we can add kill switches to organisms, but that's not then working in a natural way. But I think as we're facing the state of climate emergency and biodiversity collapse, we really need to think differently. And this is where there's been a shift in my work in some way since the Designing for the Sixth Extinction project, because we have to be thinking about our role in this natural world, and what's better for nature is better for us. I think in 2020 we're seeing multiple crises I think in 2020 we're seeing multiple crises of health, environment, economy, and social injustice. And I think there's also a crisis of imagination and action. And I'm trying to continue to tease out these problems of better in the work and the conflicts of modernity and colonial action over the last few centuries. And also fundamentally how in our quest for new and better, we ignore value in what already exists. And I'm really curious why we feel loss for certain species, why we care, and how we can create artworks that really tease out a response and a reflection on these questions. So I'm sort of working to continue to ask questions, to tell stories, imagine alternatives, but crucially also to enable action. I'm going to share one other project briefly that I made last year, and it's sort of setting the stage for the next thing I'm going to do, which I can't talk about this evening. So this work is called Resurrecting the Sublime, and it's a collaboration with Christina Agapakis, who's the creative director of Ginkgo Bioworks, a biotechnology company and synthetic biology company in Boston, and the smell researcher and artist Cecil Tolas. And we've brought back the smell of 3 flowers that were each made extinct by human colonial action. And the project started when Christina in 2016 went to the Harvard University Herbarium. She was looking for extinct flowers in the shelves there, and she found 20, including these 3. And from each she took tiny tissue samples from the pressed dried flowers. And these were all flowers that had been extinct for a few hundred years. She took the DNA back to ginkgo, and scientists there, with help from paleogeneticists, were able to extract DNA. And from these tiny samples, they developed the technology to determine the smell molecules that each plant may have produced. The lists of molecules were sent to Sissel Tollas in her lab, and she reconstructed the smells of each flower in her lab. I'm going to play a little bit of video now that sort of evokes one of the sites of these lost flowers. So that was the southern slope of Mount Haleakala in Hawaii, and the flower that you saw very briefly on that tree was a Hibiscadelphus wilderianus, and that tree went extinct in 1912. So it was the most recent extinction of the three flowers that we explored. And the simulation is built in Unreal Engine, a computer game engine, and that was an effort to try and imagine what that place was like at the time of extinction. Because these flowers weren't alone, they were part of a landscape. And this image here is the Urbexillum stipulatum, the second flower, which once grew on a very small island in the Ohio River in the USA. And that island itself has also now gone. The Hibiscadelphus in Hawaii was lost to colonial cattle ranching as the lava forests were destroyed. And in this case, the Urbexillum stipulatum was lost before the island itself was lost. It only grew in this one place, and the island was flooded when a dam was built in the 1920s. So its very particular habitat is gone. Each of these flowers was intricately linked to a place. And what's unusual for me sort of about these flowers is that I would never have known they would have existed otherwise. These are three very obscure flowers from very specific ecosystems. And I wanted to find a way to evoke a feeling of loss for something that we would never have known otherwise, that we missed because we would never have known it existed. So as part of our collaborative work, my role was to build these installations where you could experience the smells that Sissel had created based on the work that ginkgo had done. So this is at the Saint-Étienne Biennial in 2019, where we built these large vitrines where the smells of each flower diffused in the spaces, and around you is the soundtrack that you heard sort of being played around the space. So this sort of throbbing, humming recreation of a lost landscape. In the vitrine on the left is the other lava boulders to simulate that lost landscape, and on the right, the limestone outcrop of Rock Island. And there's this desire to create a tangible experience, to bring back this lost space. How do you feel a landscape that you can never be in again? And I wanted to get people inside these works, and in that experience of this very abstract, deconstructed nature, you sort of move from the museum diorama into where you would normally see an animal or a plant, and actually the humans become the subject on view. We can watch other people becoming part of this extinction experience. And the most recent version of this, which is at the Natural History Museum in Bern in Switzerland, in an exhibition called Apocalypse, you actually enter the diorama, and we really went for it because this is a museum filled with natural history dioramas. You enter at the back not knowing where you're going to end up, and you become part of the scenery. So humans are inside the space as the smell of the Urbexillum stipulatum is diffused around them, and then they can exit by the small hidden door and emerge into the gallery space and watch other humans sitting inside this lost environment. This is, for me, a different way of working from designing for the sixth extinction. The ambiguity in this work is very important to me. This is not a solution. This is not de-extinction. This is a way to evoke something much more fragile and less tangible, but trying to talk about the desires and the actions of humans rather than the solutions. So, again, artists and scientists working together is a way to unravel the stories of these plants, but all we're left with is a memory, an imperfect trace, and a reminder that we need to be better to other species, to other places, and to other peoples. And this raises a lot of questions for me about the role of the artist. Are we storytellers? Are we creating emotional responses? Are we triggering new perspectives, or connecting disparate stories and groups and species together? And I think there's another step, and that's what I'm exploring next, which is the move to action. How do you not just engage people, but help them to do something better, to do something different? So I'm going to come back to this question to end of, well, what is better for nature? And I think as we ask that and try to answer it, we can imagine that other worlds are possible, but we have to define what we mean by better. Artists can reflect society, we can challenge it and communicate it in different ways. We can help imagine, but we also need to be demanding as citizens of the planet Earth, who gets to imagine? How do we get to contribute to that imagination? Who gets to decide, and how do we demand decision changes? And again, today is such a crucial day and a painful day as we kind of see the balance of the world hanging there. This is, where I'm at, and there's more to follow in my practice as it develops. But I think each of us can follow this mantra, this sort of set of actions to kind of demand change. It's not just about imagining that someone else will do it, but how do we help enable a better future, not just for us, but for other species and for other peoples. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg for this thought-inspiring tour through her works and speculations. What is better for nature? Can we better the world? And what happens if we try doing so? With all what's at stake with biodiversity, it becomes self-evident that we all have to embrace the gravity and complexity and of this problem, and also the intangibilities. And we all have to become part of the solution. We all have to get involved. And that's right what we want to be doing now. We want to take Daisy's invitation by word and take her work, Designing for the Sixth Extinction, as a basis for further speculation and reflection. With that being said, this is the end of the first part of the evening. If you're watching from YouTube, then this is where the program will end for now. For everyone that is on Zoom, we'll have a 5-minute break, and after that we will start with the interactive part of the evening. That leaves me to nothing less than thanking very much the speakers, Professor Settele and Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, as well as Berlin Science Week for hosting the program, and you, the audience, for taking the time and diving with us into this topic. And also thank you very much to Science Notes and to you, Thomas. And I would say with that being said, let's get active, right?